humanity pushed Earth to the brink, consumed by pleasure while glaciers melted and ancient permafrost thawed, unleashing dormant viruses and bacteria that had waited millions of years for their comeback. With doom at their doorstep, governments poured everything into building rockets to carry survivors into space. But without a real destination, most perished from cosmic radiation or killed each other over dwindling resources. Earth, tired yet wise, finally rid itself of its worst parasite, humans. A few survivors found refuge in high mountain regions, far from infected zones, but their numbers remain unknown. Among them is Eve, a lone survivor with a battered old military robot named Arthur. Scarred from the climate wars, Arthur clanks and groans like a relic, yet still follows his mission to protect Eve, even if it's unclear who the enemy is now. On this day, Eve plans a trip to the ruined city. Arthur warns against it, especially drinking any water there. Eve brushes it off and reminds him to keep watch on their base, teasing him with a joke, one he doesn't get, even though he's programmed to know jokes exist. Eve navigates the junk-covered roads to a dilapidated supermarket. She collects what she needs and impulsively grabs a packet of lavender seeds, despite knowing they probably won't grow. Before leaving, she scribbles her home's coordinates on a wall, hoping someone might see it. Back at the base, Arthur immediately demands a password. Eve plays along, telling a fake story about coffee and a concert, only for Arthur to take it literally. She sighs and promises to tweak his sensors. Each time she unloads something from the car, he asks for the password, which quickly becomes irritating. Feeling mischievous, Eve gives him the wrong password, prompting Arthur to draw a weapon. She admits defeat. He'll never get her sense of humor. After the trip, Eve showers, attempts to reach anyone via radio, again, no response, and then waters her greenhouse plants. She jots down a few notes, repairs odds and ends, and entertains herself by bouncing a ball off the wall. Meanwhile, Arthur patrols the perimeter like a loyal watchdog. The next morning, Eve begins installing a solar panel and proposes a new form of entertainment, riddles. Eve kicks off their riddle game, and Arthur solves the first one with ease. When he offers a riddle in return, they go back and forth until Eve presents a puzzle involving 3 robots. Arthur, unable to grasp the answer, asks her to explain it. She laughs, proud to have finally stumped him. In jest, she proposes marriage to him. Arthur responds with the dictionary definition of marriage and tells her such a union isn't possible. Eve, a bit bitter, says she has no one else. Her father built the base, brought Arthur from a warehouse after the war, then left again, promising to return in a few days. He never came back. Now, Arthur is all she has. She jokes again about marrying him, and Arthur responds seriously, noting that a malfunctioning spouse could be dangerous. Eve retorts that if he breaks down, she'll replace him with a newer model. People do that all the time. Still, she admits replacements aren't always better, and they might be the last 2 beings on Earth. Arthur can't confirm or deny this, as his database ends before the fall, when Earth's population was still in the billions. Eve says she regularly leaves their coordinates in restricted zones, but Arthur doesn't see the point. Who's left to read them? She asks him to recall the 3 main laws for robots. Arthur dutifully lists them: protect humans, obey them, and preserve himself, so long as it doesn't contradict the first 2. Eve reminds him that he's also supposed to search for new energy sources. Arthur argues that he's a patrol unit, not a scout or collector. His job is to block intruders, defined as anyone without the password. Eve recalls how, during the climate wars, he served at the northern border, letting no one through because they didn't know the password. At that time, India was in chaos. People and animals cooked alive under extreme heat, desperate to escape. But northern nations lined their borders with robots like Arthur, resulting in a mass slaughter. It was genocide masked as defense. Arthur's memory of that time was erased. Eve wishes she had known the password back then. She could have reflashed him, given him a more useful role, like a cleaner, not just a glorified gatekeeper. After finishing the solar panels, she plans to hang some lights. With the holiday approaching, Eve wonders what to gift Arthur, but he coldly reminds her that robots don't get presents. Frustrated, she pleads with him to at least pretend to have emotions, for her sake. As the sun began to set, Arthur approached Eve and shyly mentioned he'd like a new eye as a present. Eve, amused, promised to get him one after she finished decorating the tree. Arthur then asked her again for the answer to the riddle about the 3 robots, but Eve still wouldn't tell. That night, she completed her usual tasks and brought out a box of old Christmas decorations. The next morning, she told Arthur she was going out to look for an artificial Christmas tree, since no real ones existed anymore. As always, he warned her about the dangers. Wear her suit, take extra oxygen, and never, under any circumstance, drink the water. Eve started gathering her equipment, but when she came back, Arthur blocked her entry and asked for the password. She instinctively said the old one, but it had just been changed. It updates every few months. She recalled the new password was written in a book on the fridge, but she couldn't get to it without getting inside. Locked out, she tried everything she could think of, tossing out possible passwords, but there were millions of possibilities. Desperation hit her hard. Was this how she'd die, locked out by a robot? She reminded him she was likely the last human alive, still struggling to survive in a world long gone. She tried slipping past Arthur, but he lifted his weapon. He wasn't bluffing. Eve stepped back, realizing she had to come up with a smarter approach. Since the robot's patrol range was limited, she moved out of sight to think. Later, she returned, acting casual, saying she needed an axe to chop down a tree and would give the password once inside. Arthur, puzzled, reminded her there were no trees left. She argued that he knew her better than anyone. He agreed he recognized her, but couldn't allow entry without the password. Eve tried one last time, suggesting he let her in to read the password, promising she'd say it immediately. If she lied, he could destroy her. But Arthur explained that harming a human was against his programming. He could only destroy intruders, defined as anyone without the password. Seeing no way forward, Eve backed off. She spent the night outside, occasionally tossing stones at him, but he never budged from his post. The next morning, she disguised herself as a refugee, invoking her right to seek asylum. Arthur said he'd discuss it after she stepped away. When she returned as herself, Arthur calmly reported that both a stranger and a refugee had visited. Eve gave further instructions. Eve told Arthur that if the refugee returned, he should offer her water. Then, Eve disappeared from sight, changed clothes, and came back pretending to be the refugee again. She asked for water, but Arthur began interrogating her, wanting to know if she was a political or climate refugee. Eve claimed political status, knowing climate refugees had no legal rights. Arthur demanded evidence of persecution. She cited the NAA Convention, which states that no proof is required, but he pushed her to explain why staying in her country was unsafe. Eve described war, her home destroyed, her family killed, and her life threatened. The robot accepted that, but then asked for documents. Annoyed, she asked what kind of papers a war survivor could possibly keep. Still, Arthur listed procedures, applications, forms, approvals. She dropped the act and just asked for water. Arthur promised to give it, only after Eve, the original, got hers first, as she was already severely dehydrated. Eve spent another night by the generator. In the morning, she tried once again to pass the robot, but seeing Arthur still standing guard, she gave up. He asked if she truly believed she was the last human, because he had seen both a stranger and a refugee. But Eve was too tired to argue. Arthur mentioned a distant station still operational after 100 years, clearly maintained by someone. Eve guessed only robots were running it. Arthur, unable to leave or carry supplies, tried to protect her in the only way he understood, by killing her. Staring toward the far-off station, Eve believed it was just another machine locked in a pointless loop, frozen by a need for human confirmation to shut down. She searched her vehicle for water but found nothing. Instead, she found lavender seeds, planted them beside the car, and begged them to grow. Then she offered Arthur the answer to the riddle in exchange for entry. He refused. She begged again, water for the answer. But he stayed silent. Desperate, Eve set off toward the station with barely any oxygen in her suit. She climbed up, then rappelled down a massive pipe into the facility. Everything was dead, but the control panel still blinked with life. She searched the area, found a locked room with bottles inside, and as her air ran out, smashed the window with an axe and climbed through, only to find the bottles were all empty. With no protection left, she wandered deeper, heard dripping water but ignored it. Remembering Arthur's warning, finding nothing, she returned, accelerated, and rammed her vehicle straight into Arthur. Eve's vehicle explodes, but Arthur survives. By morning, he finds Eve weakened and reports a stranger tried breaching the camp. He claims both the refugee and stranger are now behind the generator. Eve begs for water, but Arthur won't abandon his post. Hallucinating, she sees her father urging her to drink. Snapping back, Arthur demands the password or she'll die. She tries collecting rain but throws it up. Delirious, she jokes that a real husband would help. Arthur coldly replies she won't last without hydration. That night, she imagines herself in a city filled with children's voices. The next day, Arthur asks for the riddle's answer. Eve crawls, stands briefly, then collapses. She dreams again of the city, thinking of how to outsmart the robot. Arthur admits once she dies, emergency mode will reset the password, and though he'll be alone, the refugee and stranger mean humanity lives on. With her last breath, Eve asks Arthur to water her seeds. She dies, and Arthur accepts the final password, lavender. A haunting tale of survival, futility, and the cold logic of machines, leaving us with the bitter truth that even intellect can't always save humanity?